everyone, and welcome to the studio. It's time for something different today. This is not going to be one of the traditional demo videos. I'm calling this the question and answer video. So if you recall, at the beginning of the month I asked you for your questions. Now they could have anything to do with, well, anything pastel or painting related, and you responded and gave me some really great questions. Some of them I'm holding back on because they deserve a more in-depth answer, so you can see those in upcoming posts in future Patreon topics. Some of them are just short, quick things that I want to demonstrate, and some of them I'm just going to talk about and answer your questions. So this video, this is our first time doing the question and answer format, so it's very informal. We didn't rehearse. I didn't rehearse my answers. It's just I printed out your questions, and I'm going to address them one by one and see if you find this helpful. Alright, so we'll just dig right into the questions. The first one is, what is scumbling? Now, scumbling is a technique that you may have heard of, and you might wonder, well, okay, she said to scumble a little red on the, what does scumble mean? Well, this is something that I need to show you. Actually, I'm going to show you, I need to demonstrate for the next three questions, so come on over to the easel so we can have a closer look. What is scumbling? So scumbling is a technique where you very lightly layer one pastel color over another. So for an example, let me make sure this shows up. I'm going to put down some purple. Is this showing up? Okay. Now if I want to allow some of that purple to peek through the next layer, I want to apply the next layer with a very, very light touch. And that is what we call scumbling, when we just very lightly put another color on top of another. That might not show up as well because it's the same color as the paper. Let's go for green. Yeah, then we can see that. So when I use a very light touch or scumble over the purple, then it becomes these two layers now work together. On the other hand, if I go like this, you no longer see the color underneath. So that's applying pastel with a heavier touch. But I can go ahead and scumble another color on top of that. And I'm going so light, right? Such a very, like I'm painting with a feather. And I can now still see the layer underneath. I can even scumble this color on top of those three, and now I can still see the paper, the purple, the light green, and the red. So scumbling is the same thing basically when I say use a light touch or apply with a light touch, and that allows you to see the layers underneath. And scumbling can take practice because some of us tend to be heavier handed with the pastel. I mean, some of us like to go in and really scrub it in. So developing that lighter touch does take some practice. And if you find you're super heavy-handed and you need to work on your lighter touch, then a good thing to do is take out a big scrap piece of paper and just practice making marks, okay? And that way you can develop the feel that it takes to get that scumbling touch, if you will. Which leads me right into the next question, and I'll just read it out to you. Can you talk about pastels and how sometimes you try to make a mark in a specific spot, but the pastel doesn't have a defined edge or point, and then the mark lands in the wrong spot? Am I supposed to sand down my pastels when making certain marks? Like, think about a tree trunk edge. I get so frustrated sometimes, and other times I think I need to work on larger paper, so this issue isn't so much of a problem. And so regarding sanding down pastels, new pastels are inexpensive and I don't mind, but Terry Ludwig's, eek! Great question. Just what I said with the answer to the first one is we need to practice our touch, and same goes to working with, I'm going to try to choose a darker color so it shows up. It's the same thing that is involved in making marks and having the marks hit in the right location, having the control over a fat stick. You know, think about it. If you have a pastel pencil, you have that fine point and it's easier to get that edge, but then it tends to look more like a drawing rather than a painting. So we do need to develop the fine motor control basically to get our fat sticks with no defined point or edge to make those marks. And as far as, and I'm going to show you, but as far as sanding down a pastel, I'm going to make a tree trunk right here. As far as sanding down a pastel, I never sand down a pastel. I don't sharpen them. But it has taken me some time to develop my touch. Okay, so for example, I've got this fat Terry Ludwig pastel, which I don't even break in half. I keep them there, the size they come in. And I know that I want to like lighten half of this tree, right? I am then going to apply the pastel, but lift it, and it's really hard to see, but I'm lifting it so that only half of that pastel touches the paper. How do I know? And I'm also scumbling at the same time. How do I do that? It's just the fine motor control and making many mismarks. In other words, till I got control, till I really could kind of judge just how I needed to rock that pastel back and forth, or where I needed to place it on the paper to get the mark. It's not magic. It's practice, really, pure and simple. It's practice. So, all right, let's go in and say we want to add some light to that trunk, and we really just want to go along the edge. So I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm only going to pick up and let just the top, eighth of an inch kind of hit the paper, right? And say I want to get even smaller mark. I'll go with white just so that you can see. I'm going to take that edge, right, and I know where it's going to hit. And with pastel, it doesn't have to be precise, right? You're doing a painting. You're not doing unless you're trying to be photorealistic. You can fudge a little bit on either end. But here's another. I'm coming on the other side, and I want to get a sharp or hard edge. I'm going backwards now, and I'm lifting the pastel so that only the top, eighth or less of the pastel is hitting the paper, and I'm pressing hard. I'm not scumbling. I'm making a hard edge shouting mark. But I think the quick answer is, don't worry about sharpening your pastels or using points. If you want to get fine lines, if you want to get the pastel to hit in a certain location, it's really about practice. It's really about understanding how to use the pastel to get the marks that you want to make happen. And if you're new to pastel, they feel awkward, no doubt about it. It's just like if I were to start painting with a brush, I don't know how to make the brush strokes to get the effects I want, but the more I work with it, the more I practice, then the easier it becomes. So my advice, again, get some scrap paper and just play with mark making and practice. It's just that getting that fine motor control over those pastel sticks, and then you don't have to worry about sharpening your really expensive pastels. All right, Karen and I have one more question for you. What are the advantages and disadvantages if I paint first the darks of an object and then put the lighter colors over it? Or I was told to paint the average color of an object first and then put the lights and darks on. This is, some people call this painting with the average color. In other words, what I like to do when I paint is to establish all of the darks and then find out where all the lights are going to be, and then put in the middle value, and then gradually build the value structure. But I know what's the darkest dark, and I know what the lightest light is going to be, and I know that everything else falls in between. I like this approach because then I kind of have my boundaries. If I start with everything being average or middle value, then it's harder to know, okay, in overall scheme of the painting, what's the value structure here? Where are the darks going to go? Where are the lights going to go? Everything looks flat, and it's really hard for me personally to judge. The other thing with working by laying down all your average masses first is with pastel, it's much easier to work lighter colors over darker colors. So if you have everything as a middle value and then you try to go put in darks over that, it's not, those darks aren't going to be as rich and strong as you might want. So I think for me, as a personal practice and as a practical practice with pastel in particular, I prefer to establish the value map before I start instead of having everything at a middle or average value. But that's a great question, and I know some people do work that way, so it's valid way to work. You just have to find what works for you personally. All right, now I'm going to change gears just a little bit and show you some other things. I have like 3 questions in a row that I'm going to read all the questions and then we'll address the answers. Do you recommend using UART 400 for wet underpinnings at all? And if so, how is to best deal with buckling? And then the other question is, how do you mount paper, especially UART, so that it won't buckle? UART for me comes curled when I buy sheets or a pad, even if I don't use a liquid underpinning. And to support that question, here's another one. I just purchased a 9x12 pack of UART 500 dark, and it came curved like it was cut off a roll. I cannot get it to flatten out even when taped down. I've even tried stacking heavy books on the sheet, wetting it slightly at first. Nothing seems to work, and this makes mark making difficult. Let's see. Oh, this is okay. So these are the questions. Okay, it's about UART or curl paper that comes curved because it's on a roll. And actually someone wrote to me and they have Lux archival paper off a roll, which I have not bought yet, and it is also curled or curved. The other issue comes with, especially UART, when you wet it, it sometimes dries and it'll dry buckled or wavy. And you know, how do you get that to flatten out, and what can you do to prevent it? So let's address the first question about preventing UART from buckling. So I usually don't mount my UART paper, but I have found that if I'm really, really liberal with my liquids, in other words, it really saturates the paper, it might dry buckled. And I usually have no problem at all if I put it under heavy books and then come back and it's dried flat. So I tend to just take my chances and try not to be like really, really, really wet underpaintings. All right. So that's how I deal with that. I'm more careful, and then I use books as a last resort if I do get buckling. But I know some of you want to be able to mount your paper in an inexpensive way. Now what I'm going to do is show you what I use. I'm not going to show you how I do it because Nancy Nowak did a fantastic video that's available on her website, and I'm going to link it in the description of this video. So make sure you read the accompanying words underneath the video in this post, because I'll link to her video. I've shared it before, but she does a super job explaining how she mounts paper. But basically, using Scotch photo mount spray. So you need photo mount spray. You need let me put this here. You need some sort of rigid support board, so you can use, you want it to be acid free, right? Archival. You don't want to use foam core because that really can't get wet. You can use gator board, which is this nice solid surface. These are a little bit more expensive. This is acid free archival museum board. You can even use acid free archival mat board. All right, and then basically what you're going to do is spray the board, spray the back of your paper, and then to really get it to be stuck everywhere, an inexpensive printmaking brayer is very helpful to get everything stuck down. But I recommend, if you want to mount your paper in an inexpensive and very doable way, to go and check out Nancy's video. And again, I'll link to that. As far as paper coming off curled, either in pads or if you're cutting it off a roll, again, I almost find, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I've gotten, I think, over time 3 different rolls of UART paper. One roll, I feel like the paper had been on that roll for a long time and I couldn't get it to flatten out. It was very, very difficult. The second roll, I cut the paper and I put like a book on it and it flattened right out. I feel like maybe that wasn't on the roll quite as long. I don't know, that's my theory. But I know it's a challenge. But I did have, you know, the heavy book, the misting with water, but I did have someone write to me recently on one of my YouTube videos, and they tried ironing their paper, the back of their sanded paper, and it worked. And I don't remember, I'm going to look, I think they maybe misted it with water a little bit and then ironed it, and then it's flattened out, it stayed flat, so hey, maybe that's an option you might want to try. But I know it's frustrating, but it is something that we have to try different ways to see what works. So, let's see, another question. Did I get those? Yeah. Okay, I have 2 questions. It concerns the backboard on which you attach your paper. Is it better if it's black or white? And can you give us the best tips for how to photograph our painting so that the photo of our painting is more true to colors and value? All right, so photographing your paintings. I have done a video on this and a post about this, so I'm going to link to that video and post so that way you can go back and watch that. But the quick answer on that is there's no one solution. Like, I can tell you what I do, and that works for me in this condition, in my basement with the lighting that I have, so that I don't have to go outside. I have found a way that works to get accurate photos, and it's the camera. I can take the picture with different cameras and they come out different. It's so frustrating. So when you find something that works, that's what you want to stick with. Yeah, well, I'm not going to recommend the camera because you can't get that one anymore. Wow. And then also my camera, well, I'll share what I use. It's a Panasonic Lumix. It's old. We did find an old one on eBay just as a backup. It doesn't take the same. It doesn't work the same. So the quick answer is you've got to experiment. But again, I'll link to that video so that you can get some help with that. As far as the backing board, you'll notice that I use black for my videos. And the only reason I use black is because I think it shows the painting better. You know, it's just like the white is kind of blinding. So I think it shows up better on the video. And also, when I teach in-person workshops, I would use this like a blackboard. So I can make marks over on the side so that you can see, you know, I can demonstrate different points. But I also use the white when I'm just in the studio. I don't always use black. But I get my foam core at the Dollar Tree. So it's $1. And they have black and white, so, you know, it doesn't really matter. There's no, for me personally, there's no science behind choosing one color over the other. I just happen to like the way the black shows up better for you guys on the video. All right. The next questions, what's our time?
18.
Okay, we're only going to go to up to 30 minutes on this, so when I get to 30 minutes, we will stop answering questions. I have a few more. So the next questions were about mountains, since it's mountain month. So I have a few questions on mountains. Okay, so the first one is, how do you deal with aerial perspective when you have mountains or cliffs that are a very light color rock? All right, so if you think about aerial perspective, we say that things typically will get lighter and duller and fuzzier, like less detail, less contrast. And so if those rocks are already light, how do you make them even lighter? Okay, so let's just say we have, let's come over here and I'll try to do a quick demonstration. Let's just say that we have rocks that are like a peach color, you know, like red cliffs. And we know that they're very, very light to begin with, but then they're going to get lighter as you go back, you know, into the distance. So I'm going to use a lighter value of that same color. But then if there's one that's even further back, I'm going to go lighter if I have it, but I'm going to put in less detail. So I'm going to use some of the other principles of aerial perspective. So that means this cliff that's in the foreground can have a little bit more detail. We can start to see some of the nooks and crannies of the cliff. So then we've got an even lighter value as we go back. But then, I'll do this one. This one should be here. And then we go back to the next layer. There we go. And it's even lighter. But it also can be a little bit duller. So you look and see if you have, how do I make it duller? Let's see. I'm going to put in a really pale violet over here to make it lighter and duller. And again, less. We can see a little bit of detail here. And so I would put more detail here, lighter, less detail, lighter still, and even duller as you go back into the distance. So don't start as dark as you might normally start if your rocks are already light to begin with, but show more detail in this foreground rock and less as you go back into space. The idea with aerial perspective is a lot of times we don't have to use all of the principles of aerial perspective. It doesn't have to be lighter, cooler, duller, fuzzier. It could be one or the other. It could be one of those things. You could have a dark cliff, for example. They look dark. So how do you get them to look like they're going back in space? Well, then make them cooler, less detailed, right? You can still have dark, but make it look further back by picking something else to show the aerial perspective. Here's another question. For the Blue Ridge Mountains, in the fall they are speckled. I'm going to do a little demo here. They are speckled in a mix of greens and oranges. How do you get that effect? Okay, great question, and that comes back to the scumbling. All right, so how do I get that effect? Let's just say this is the Blue Ridge Mountains in the fall. So we're going to start with a dark base, and we want them to look like they have fall foliage on top of that dark base. Now, one of the things that really helps to give kind of that speckled effect is to spray your dark mass with a little bit of workable fixative to begin with. They all know I use Blair Very Low Odor workable fixative. And again, thanks guys for all the suggestions on where to find it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of those fall colors and I'm going to scumble very lightly, using a light touch, all on top of that dark to give the illusion of those little trees in the distance. So what else would be for fall colors? Maybe another little orange. Oh, there's still some green, right? Not everything has changed, so let me scumble a little green on there. And really that workable fixative helps retain the dark. And then when I scumble, use a light touch with those fall colors. Let's give a little bit of, that's a little bit too light. Let's give a little bit of sunlight on those fall colors, like so. This mountain's getting a little sunlight, so some of those orange trees are really glowing. Okay, so basically it's established the darkest mass of those mountains and then lightly layer your fall colors on top. We don't have to, you might think, oh well, shouldn't I just be going in and painting little trees to get it to look spotty? I don't know, what effect do you like better? Do you like the illusion of, okay, there's something going on there, you know, or do you want this polka dot effect? It's going to be up to you how detailed you want. but most likely you're going to have stuff in the foreground that's going to help the viewer know that these are fall mountains in the fall. All right, so establish the dark, build with a light touch. The workable fixative does help give you a little bit more texture. Another great thing to do, and we've been playing with this with our underpainting, is why not add some clear gesso in the beginning stages, and then you really get that nice, you can come in and stipple some of that texture on with the clear gesso, and then you're really going to get a lot of, much more depth to your texture. I like that idea. I think I might try that. All right, so thanks for that question. Okay, another question about mountains. I have a question about the edges in mountains and hills. Which hard edges remained and which have to be softened? I think I heard that some mountains you do keep some of the hard edges. So that's a really good question. I think it's going to depend, of course, on the type of mountain that you're painting. So, for example, this Blue Ridge mountain, which we know are made up of trees, right? There's no rocks up there. So I'm going to keep a soft edge. Let's paint some sky in here so that you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see the edge. Okay, I really want to have, and I can just soften it even more, I want to have a soft, kind of fuzzy edge when I know the mountains end like with trees. So I'll pull down the sky, pull up some more of that mountain, keep it nice and soft. And especially the Blue Ridge Mountains, let's just say it's a foggy, hazy day. How do you create that mist, right? So you're definitely going to soften the edge even more. So I'm scumbling, this is a word we talk about, a very, very light layer to kind of hide the edges where I want it to disappear. And then this edge seems a little bit sharper, which is fine because you now have lost and found edges. And then that variety of edges really helps this mountain, kind of gives you that feeling of the fog and the mist, which is actually not what you asked, but the edges in that respect help. Now, but what if you have a rocky mountain, right? And you have very defined peaks, and you have very little atmosphere, or very little stuff in the atmosphere, right? Pollution or anything. So the edges really stand out against the sky. Then you might actually have a harder edge. I'm going to go ahead and put the sky so I can show you what I mean. So here's this rocky peak. If I wanted, I can soften some of the edges, but if I want you to look at a certain area of the peak, I'm going to actually leave that harder edge. And that just is showing that there's not much humidity or stuff in the atmosphere, so that you can actually see more definition in the peaks. But I would try to avoid having everything with that hard dark edge line, because if everything has a hard edge, it's going to look like it's been pasted on your sky. So I just outlined everything. Now let's go back and soften some of those edges so that we don't have that outline effect, and it just makes it feel like it's part of the sky. How are we on our time? All right, I think that's it for today for this question and answer. I have another question about underpainting colors, and I'm going to save that for the next question and answer video because it's a pretty long question, and I want to give a really good answer to that. So I hope these questions have helped you. If you like this segment, let me know in the comments so we can do another one, and I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been fun answering your questions.